Hear me okay? Yeah. Good. You know what you're witnessing here, right? You get this fun message from Dr. LeBrecq. You have a great message from Father Pete. Send a deacon up to deliver the tough love. That's what this is about. When Dr. LeBrecq was giving his talk, I remember this article I read not too long ago, arguing against these people that had posited that post-delivery abortion was okay. And the lady that wrote the article ended it with saying, basically, the embryo within the mother is not a potential human being, but a human being with potential. And I think it sort of sums up, I think, what Dr. LeBrecq was talking about, and I ask you to hold that thought. So I'm going to talk about contraception in terms of why it's a grave matter for us and for society. Like I said, this is the tough love part of the evening. Contraception is a grave matter in the eyes of the church, and it's in the full sense because it places our souls in jeopardy. I'm very peripatetic, so watch out. So, by our respective callings to holy orders, Father Peak and I are in the business of saving souls. And so this is very much a serious matter for us. And this evening I will present the moral case against contraception, primarily from the perspective of its adverse consequences to our soul, to our faith, and to our society. Now, I'm not a bit hesitant, and most of you probably realize this, that I have tremendous amount of dismay with the ongoing legalization of our descent into moral confusion, particularly over the past several weeks. And as much as we may be inclined to bemoan or bewail our circumstances, we cannot address the unraveling of our culture without addressing one of its major causes and the consequences of contraception, which means we Catholics must take a long, hard, and honest look at ourselves. Now, if we want to reverse our culture's descent into socially acceptable hedonism, then we need to understand the connection between moral relativism and contraception, to understand the connection between contraception and same-sex marriage. And I suspect many of you have never even considered that. Contraception contributes to a culture that believes that personal happiness is the highest possible human aim, and that it ought to be pursued by all means possible. Contraception leads inevitably to the rejection of every rational opposition to unfettered sexual license. And we see that before us. The consequences of contraception's denial of the truth about human sexuality has put freedom on a path of self-destruction. All right? Our freedom is putting us on a path of self-destruction. Freedom as defined and practiced by moral relativists will lead to the abolition of man. Does that sound familiar? It's like the book title some of you have read. From the anthropological point of view, there must be consequences to ignoring the human condition and its moral, social, and political implications. There is such a thing as natural form and limits of the human condition. And nature will have its day. It certainly will, whether we believe in it or not. C.S. Lewis saw with great clarity more than 70 years ago that man's mastery over nature will end in the abolition of nature. And then that only in man's mastery over mankind, the abolition of man. So we took on science, and now we're trying man's mastery over mankind. And that will lead to the abolition of us. Now, the Church's wisdom on contraception can be understood in practical terms as well. Parenthood powerfully combats the two greatest dangers in a society: selfishness and isolation. It's very practical. Having children works powerfully to overcome selfishness. Anyone that's chewed on a soggy French fry is pre-chewed by their son. knows all about this. For much of their childhood, children cannot offer anything approaching the companionship of our spouse or the sort of friendship that comes from among equals. Parenthood involves the unconditional giving of oneself without expecting anything in return. And is therefore a great cure, a great way to combat self-centeredness, the raising of a child. And to some extent, this effect is cumulative. The more children a couple has, the less self-centered they will tend to be. Just try scheduling a date night. Pretty tough. Love Wins is the model of the same-sex movement, and it expresses the full realization of human power unchecked by God or nature. Love Wins has as its foundation the widespread use of contraception. If the love wins mentality continues to spread, the authority of law and of the state will become more absolute in the absence of any higher authority. Absolute freedom from the traditional family can only mean the state's power is used against the family. To see this rise of the state's power against the family is to recognize the social consequences of contraception go beyond the confines of sexuality. So if we have a subjective understanding of freedom, it builds a culture where absolute truth that binds all of us together is lost. As I like to say to my church ladies, if I say something's black and they say it's white, and I pull out a gun, all of a sudden it becomes black. He who has the power defines what is true in the absence of absolute truth. That's called tyranny. Without absolute truth, society slides downward into this morass of moral relativism. Inevitably, moral relativism leads to this supremacy of the strong over the weak. Eventually and ultimately, it leads to absolute tyranny, where truth is defined by those with the most power. Now, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, and that's what we're in most of today. Today, the tyranny of evil is shrouded in trappings of democratic consensus. We equate moral goodness with popular consensus as if it makes goodness out of evil. We're being systematically shamed into a tolerance of evil that is veiled beneath the language of love wins, human rights, and civic tolerance. There's plenty of blame to go around why the contraceptive mentality is taking hold, but it boils down to this. We often have not convinced ourselves, we have not successfully convinced most Catholics, and we have not convinced anyone else for that matter, that contraception has grave social and personal consequences. Nor have we yet convinced enough Americans that abortion is a real social injustice. Until we do that, we can expect to see the contraceptive mentality continue to foster and encourage libertine social tyranny, religious persecution, and family disintegration. So is there any doubt as to why the Catholic Church would consider the use of contraception a grave matter? Beyond the societal consequences, contraception is a grave matter because it is fatal to the true faith and fatal to the eternal life which our faith promises. Now to be clear, here comes the tough love part. Professed Catholics who practice contraception either give up the practice of contraception or they give up their Catholic faith. You cannot have both. Now, I readily concede many would strongly and perhaps violently disagree with this statement. They will point out the widespread practice of contraception among many, some would say the majority of professed Catholics. And they will quote from numerous professed Catholic moral theologians who openly defend contraception. They will give you the pronouncements of whole conferences of bishops who claim that contraception is really a matter of conscience. But they and those particular bishops would be wrong. I know these are strong words from the simple country evening, sure enough. It's a true story, from Paris, Missouri. But there are 2,000 years of church teaching behind those words and the wisdom of Father John Hardin, whose words inspired his talk. And it's truly sad that contraception has become so prevalent that many sincerely believe that contraception is morally permissible and they will likely never be told they're doing wrong. In fact, they may not be barred from receiving Holy Communion and may not even have to confess the practice of contraception when they go to confession. However, it has been the constant teaching of the Catholic Church that the deliberate practice of contraception between husband and wife is a mortal sin. Those who persist in this practice are acting contrary to the explicit teaching of the Church. Therefore, those who defend contraception forfeit their claim to be professed Catholics. Consequently, those who persist in their defense of contraception deprive themselves of divine graces, graces that are reserved to bona fide members of the Catholic Church. Now, I won't speak for you, but I need all the divine grace I can get. Does anybody here not need it? That's a trick question. Here's the crux of the matter. Concerning those who somewhere mistakenly find support for contraception within the Church's teachings, the Church's infallibility covers not only doctrines that are to believe, like Christ's divinity and His real presence in the Eucharist, the Church also, and with emphasis, also teaches infallibly what the followers of Christ are to do. Not just what we are to believe, but what we are to do. The Church's irreversible doctrines include truths that we are obliged to believe, but they also include precepts that we are universally bound to obey. Why is this important to know? Because there are nominally Catholic writers who are claiming that the Church's gift of infallibility extends only to her teaching of the faith. It does not, so their claim goes, include grave moral obligations like the prohibition of adultery, sodomy, or contraception. This is simply not true. By divine ordinance, those who call themselves Catholic must subscribe to the moral teachings of the Catholic Church, of which the Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis, is the visible head. This Catholic Church now stands alone in the world as the one universal authority which condemns contraception is contrary to the will of God, for the last one standing, so to speak. Why do so many Catholics on the Sundays go to Holy Communion and so few go to confession? All the evidence indicates that the core issue at stake is contraception. If contraception is not a grave sin, well then what is? And why go to confession if I'm still in God's friendship, although practicing contraception? St. James tells us that faith without good works is dead. What good is it to give verbal profession of the Catholic faith and then behave like a pagan in marital morality? I also stated several moments ago that contraception is fatal to eternal life. So what does this mean? It means exactly what it says. The practice of contraception is a grave sin. And those who indulge in the practice are in danger of losing their immortal souls. Now, as difficult or intolerable as this language may seem, it is still nonetheless the truth. Historic Christianity has always held, holds now, and will always hold, that contraception is a serious offense against God. Unless repented, it is punishable by eternal deprivation of the vision of God, which we call eternal death. I could probably spend an hour if it comes out all the historic witnesses to this fact, but I'll stick with St. Augustine, who wrote a whole treatise on conjugal adultery, in which he declared intercourse with one's legitimate wife as unlawful and wicked whenever the conception of offspring is prevented. When Pope St. John Paul II repeated St. Augustine's statement about contraception as marital adultery, he was crucified by the world media. That is why no one should have been surprised at the reception, or rather the rejection, of Pope Paul VI's encyclical Humanae Vitae and how it was received in 1968. 30 years ago, Pope Paul VI appealed to the conscience of the world when he warned about the consequences of practicing artificial birth control. His warning was prophetic. What have been the consequences of contraception in one nation after another? There have been numerous, but I will present 4 of the more serious consequences: fornication, adultery, sterilization, and murder of the unborn. With respect to fornication, how can we expect unmarried people to practice chastity if married people are allowed to practice what the wise Jesuit Father John Hardin calls mutual masturbation? I had a chuckle when I read that. Only a Jesuit could come up with a term and phrase like that. Intercourse is a divinely instituted means for married persons to cooperate with God in procreating children. It is also the divinely provided means of fostering mutual love between husband and wife. Contraception, however, does just the opposite. It deliberately prevents the conception of a child and fosters not mutual love, but mutual selfishness. With respect to adultery, how can a husband respect a wife who insists on using contraceptives? And how can a wife respect a husband who refuses to accept the duties of fatherhood? The soul of Christian marriage is selfless love between the spouses. Contraceptive relations between married people are a lie. They pretend to love one another, but in reality they are using one another in what might just well be called prostitution. The history of mankind is clear. Contraception in marriage leads to infidelity in either or in both partners. Why limit sex activity to one spouse if no commitment to having or raising children is the consequence of intercourse? With respect to sterilization, we do not ordinarily associate contraception with sterilization, but we should. It is one thing to use contraception as an occasional malpractice. It is something else when people have themselves sterilized to avoid even fathering or mothering a child. Yet massive sterilization in a country like the United States has become commonplace. We now discover, there was recently discovered a 5-year synthetic hormone contraceptive that gives carte blanche to any female teenager or adult willing to have it surgically implanted into the skin. One of the largest school systems in America is doing just that at taxpayers' expense. The sterilizing hormone is implanted under the skin of the young girl's arm. No parental permission is needed. This opened the door to an epidemic of sexually transmitted diseases whose ratio is already off the chart in this country. On a side note, I recently looked at a book written by a doctor at UCLA who treats young women there, and you're probably familiar with the book. Talked about the outbreak of STDs among the female population at UCLA and how it was so underreported because it didn't fit the narrative. But it's true, and it's out there. If you look for it, you will see the signs of culture slowing down. And then there's abortion. I've saved abortion as the last of these consequences. This too is a law of human behavior. Abortion follows contraception like the law of gravity. As people come to equate sexual pleasure with self-gratification, there is no limit to their lustful pride. Contraception has taught them to have their own way. They will stop at nothing to have their way, not even the murder of their unborn offspring. Respect for human life requires selfless love of human beings. As a nation is nurtured on contraceptive self-indulgence, it becomes a nation that kills innocent children if they are an obstacle to the self-gratification of those who brought them into existence. So where do we go from here? I know I've thrown a lot at you, and much I hope you are familiar with. So I'll conclude with what our duties are that bear directly on this grave moral matter. First, we must know the truth revealed by Christ and taught by His church. Second, it is our duty to live the truth as Christ, who is truth, showed us by His life on earth. Third, it is our duty to defend the truth, because we realize how disastrous consequences of errors and falsehoods, and how blessed are the fruits of possessing the truth. Fourth, it is our duty to share the truth with others, because this is the highest practice of charity on which our salvation depends. Fifth, it is our duty to suffer for the truth. We are to rejoice when people oppose us, criticize us, or speak all kinds of calumny against us. And finally, it is our duty to regain our zeal to re-evangelize or paganize America. Remember the divine graces I mentioned earlier? How the practice of contraception separates us from divine grace? Can you imagine carrying out these 6 duties without the assistance of divine grace? I cannot. Can't imagine. We need those divine graces to carry out these responsibilities. I'll leave you with the words I used to end last Sunday's homily. Whether you realize it or not, we've entered a time in the life of this country where each of us must be like the prophet Amos who went before and Isaiah, speaking God's truth through the use of power in the service of immorality. The contraceptive mentality is slowly destroying us as individuals, it's destroying our souls, it's destroying our families, and it's destroying our society. This is why the age of casual Catholicism is over, and the age of heroic Catholicism has begun. None of us can be Catholics by accident anymore, but instead all of us